Hi, and welcome back to This Week in Voice, Season 9, Episode 6. My name is Bradley Metrock. I'm CEO of Project Voice, General Partner of Project Voice Capital Partners. We've got a fantastic show, some very interesting stories in the news this past week as it relates to conversational AI. We're going to get into those in just a moment. We're thrilled to have a great panel of guests. As always, I'm going to start with Craig Besnoy. Craig, take a moment. Tell us who you are. Tell us what you do.
My name is Craig Besnoy. I'm from the law firm Besnoy Law. I focus mostly around compliance, and I've been really exploring and working with clients about how compliance is going to play a factor into AI, protect assets that are created through AI. But more importantly, where I've been focusing on is being able to see how some of the attribution could be placed back to the source products around AI. So that's playing into effect in real time with some of the actor and writer strikes that you're seeing in Hollywood. And that's the area that I think that I'm using some of my history of compliance in practical terms on how AI is going to go forward.
I think the intersection of AI and law is going to be fascinating over the rest of our lifetimes, and you're right there on the front lines. Craig, thank you for being part of the show with us. Next up, we have, yeah, for sure. So next up, we got George Colwell. George, say hello. Tell us who you are. Tell us who you're with. Tell us what you do.
Great. Thanks, Bradley. George Colwell. I lead IDVerifact, which is a digital identity platform provider. My background is in large-scale financial services, digital transformation. So I bring a lot of cutting-edge technology into banks, credit unions, insurance companies, wealth management firms, that type of thing. Mostly, my experience with AI, particularly generative AI, is mostly around open source, large language models being brought into companies to make use of their own internal data, as well as generative AI chatbots that are being both internally focused and externally focused with clients.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for being here and joining us.
No problem. Thanks.
And next up, we have John Walter. John, we met in person a few weeks ago. Pleasure to have you on the show. Tell us who you are, tell us what you do, and tell us who you're with.
Bradley, thank you for having me. Like Craig, I'm a fellow lawyer, and I practiced law for about 8 years. And then I was outside legal counsel to a firm that for 27 years has been helping companies choose the best customer support outsource vendor, typically for large-scale inbound support. Over the past year, of course, a major factor for our clients is evaluating the use of artificial intelligence by outsourced vendors. And then also we're just getting an opportunity to see how these clients are using this technology internally as well. And so anything at the intersection of law, AI, customer experience, and outsourcing is a big passion. And I'm excited to be here and talk with you all.
So normally this is too many lawyers for a show, too many. But we will make an exception for today. John, thank you for being part of the show with us. So with that, we're going to get into the news, and I'm going to pull up story number 1 here. I'm going to read this headline out loud. This is from the Washington Post. Amazon's Alexa has been claiming the 2020 election was stolen. I'm going to read the subhead. The popular voice assistant says the 2020 race was stolen, even as parent company Amazon promotes the tool as a reliable election news source, foreshadowing a new information battleground. So, yeah, okay. So, yeah, this is pretty heavy, right to start off with. And Craig, I'm going to start with you, and then George and John, the same order that we went through the introductions in. There's no bigger story right now that just kind of destroys discourse and dialogue than the January 6th story. And it's like a lot of things in our culture where there's polarity around a key sort of set of facts. And it's part of a larger movement where AI has arrived at a time where we don't get along on a lot of stuff as a culture. We don't get along. We don't see things eye to eye, and we don't want to see things eye to eye. Thank you very much. We're good. So it's a strange sort of world that we live in. So my question for you is, first of all, as always, what stood out to you from this story? A super interesting story for the Washington Post, which, as they noted, is owned by Amazon. But do you think there's any hope for AI in any form, voice, text, chat, or other types of AI, making it easier for humans to get along with each other and share information rather than continue to fracture apart and suffer from misinformation?
Yeah, I think that there is a room for AI to do that. A lot of times where it really comes down to sourcing of where the AI, most of this all the generated AI comes from a source. And so if we can filter the sources, and it's easier to filter the sources and then feed those into a computer than having to filter the sources and feeding it into a human brain, because the human brain isn't going to necessarily, you can't really just check a box. So I think that that's where some of the ideas around compliance that I have. So in order for certain historical information or source material to be included in AI, there should be an obligation on the part of the companies that are to be able to put a tick mark in there and to be able to have some type of filter that the AI can go through and start to only choose those sources where they have some verifiable information. And I think that might be a way that they can filter in order to be able to produce artificial intelligence information that's accurate and timely. It's one thing when you're talking about a political discourse. It's another thing when the AI is generating life-saving drugs or medicine that we'll talk about later on in the broadcast.
Well, it would be something if we could agree on sources of verification, but we have trouble agreeing on that as well. We're in this time where we not only disagree on basic fact. I could name any fact I want. I could say, how about the world is round? I could go out and find as many people as I want to find who would disagree with that and be very passionate about it. And I hear what you're saying. I aspire to that. I'm as hopeful as you are, and I like your optimism. George, I want to come to you and ask the same question. Interesting story. What stood out to you perhaps the most? You're in a world that depends on trust with all that you do. I'd love to just sort of hear your thoughts on where AI is going to sit for us with stuff like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that first stood out to me was, I'm not sure how much the writer knows about AI, in that Alexa is not an AI. Alexa is a natural language processor, and all it did was turn the query into text and then go to the internet and find an article and read it back to them. When I read the article, I went right back to ChatGPT and I put the same question in, and it nailed it. So my thought is Alexa could do with some generative AI. And that's probably the next evolution of the tool. And the larger the data set that's in that large language model, the better off the AI is going to be discerning sort of what should be considered fact and what should be considered fiction, I think. Or at least, giving both sides of it and saying, hey, do your research, get some valid sources, and here's some citations that might help. But to the point of identifying sources, I think that AI is probably back where newspapers were, I don't know, 400 years ago, before journalistic ethics and everything came to the forefront and people understood that editors were important, and checking source data was important, and verifying with 2 or 3 different sources was important before you put a news article out. We've gone away from that. But I think that if you can imbue AI with those types of behaviors, we're going to be okay. And these things are sensationalist, in my view. I got a real positive outlook on what AI can do. And we're in the early days. I mean, really accessible generative AI tools have only been out there for maybe a year. And I think we're going to learn lessons and we're going to get better at this. And, you know, to me, if you have a machine that can read absolutely everything that's written in the world, whether it be English, French, German, Russian, Japanese, whatever, and then start bringing more intelligence around discerning what's real and what's not, it's going to be better for everybody.
No, I agree with that for sure. And there's no better commentary than for us to disagree on what AI is within this story, right? You know, Alexa, it's interesting because if you lined up 1,000 people and said, what is AI? Is Alexa an AI? Is ChatGPT a real AI? I can find you tons of people who would say no. You know, there's that's an interesting kind of observation as well, is that it's hard to agree on what AI should or shouldn't be doing when there's a lot of disagreement on, you know, even to this day, what it is. And I think that just sort of is an interesting foundation to the commentary here. I liked everything you said. And John, I'm coming to you. Interesting piece from the Washington Post, obviously. Your thoughts on it, and is there any hope for AI improving the discourse rather than continuing to distance us?
So great points made so far. And what the article points out is that Amazon responded by shutting down Alexa's ability to respond to these types of questions, which I think is an inappropriate step, unless it's, like George pointed out, it's just, you know, it's very rudimentary technology that's being used in comparison to what ChatGPT can do, and it's not capable of giving a nuanced answer, then maybe that's an appropriate response. But I tend to believe that the best way to use this type of technology to build harmony within our society would be to allow these machines to provide nuanced responses that cover both sides of the argument from both liberal and conservative sources, and provide data source attribution so that the recipient can make their own determinations.
Yeah, no, I like that too. So, you know, there's two schools of thought, at least from what I've read. And I'd love to sort of get y'all's thoughts, anyone who has a comment on this, you know, before we move on to the next story. So ultimately, AI systems are going to be very you know, they're already contextual anyway, but they're just going to become more and more context driven and more and more personalized to us. So there's diverging thoughts out there where, let's say that you've got a household that whatever I say will be probably the wrong thing. Let's say that you've got a household that thinks we should abolish the U.S. government. Okay, so this is the prevailing thought in the household, that we should abolish the U.S. government. And there's a lot of good arguments out there that could be made against doing such a thing. So from an AI point of view, and from a content curation within that AI ecosystem, do you keep that household, like feed that information, feed the opinions and the perspective of that household back onto itself, only give them information that affirms that bias, only give them information that confirms and furthers that pre-existing way of thinking? Or do you challenge that existing way of thinking with things that come into the mainstream media or other information sources? And you could take any point of view that you wanted to, but the fact is that so far we've seen reluctance to provide balanced viewpoints, and more gravitation toward, you know what, if they think that, just give them that information and let's just not even bother. What do you think the ultimate the destiny of AI is? Ultimately, you know, there is truth in the world. Are we going to give it to people, or are we not going to give it to them?
I have a response if no one else. I'm sure
Fire
others
away.
will speak up also. So right now, that's what we see happening in the current media landscape. People want to hear what they believe. And we see that reflected in the major news media outlets. And I see AI as having an opportunity to be very persuasive, to be able to take someone who's very extreme and passionate about a topic. Imagine the most like polarizing topic out there. And it could be able to know the persuasion of the person it's talking to, and to be able to affirm the accurate parts of their position and assuage them, and then politely provide persuasive information as compared to what we see on the news today. Go to Fox News or go to CNN. It's just it's insulting to one side or the other. It's not persuasive. It's just rallying the troops for either side. So I think there is an opportunity for this to be something that bridges the gap, and something that George hit on earlier. This is a highly sensational topic. I think it's kind of a shame the way that this has kind of been labeled, painting this broad brush about all AI by looking at what this one response from Alexa is providing as compared to what, ChatGPT can do. Because it's a shame, because not only is it, kind of giving a bad light for political discourse, but also for the adoption of this technology and customer support operations, because hallucination is the biggest fear among enterprise clients when it comes to using generative output to customers. And these types of articles don't help.
George, Craig, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, we have to be able to at least strive to be able to provide both sides of an argument through AI. We have to be able to use AI to better the situation that we're in now. And I think that by, documenting, true sources, being able to give both sides of an opinion in a measure, in a measured approach is where we want to strive. I think we should look at this as a tool to improve ourselves, as opposed to doubling down on the situation where we are now, which I think that the vast majority of us agree is problematic.
Yeah, and I think that there's a real risk in, like the large scale generative AI models like ChatGPT, whatever Google's working on. There's a real risk in those getting hijacked. And I think from a broader landscape, you really got to pay attention and keep those as neutral as possible. There will be open sourced large language models that'll get trained on right propaganda and left propaganda, and people may want to use tools that are built on those to sit in their echo chamber. But from a sort of a bringing or leaning towards goodness and moving towards goodness in the internet, you want to make sure that those AI models that are generally available, built into things like Bing and Google search and everything else, are very neutral, nonpartisan. Just here's the facts, here's both sides of it, but here's the facts of it, right? And it's hard because there's humans behind the scenes, and there's people that don't have altruistic motives that are going to want to hijack these things. And modern media is full of that stuff. So you got to be very careful with how these generative AI models are going to progress, right? And make sure that it's taking in as much material, both written, visual, whatever, as it can into those models, and providing both points of view if it's contentious, but ultimately saying, the 2020 election wasn't stolen. Right? So, and again, that's my opinion. Other people have other opinions, but if the facts lead you towards that, the LLMs and the generative AIs that are built on top of them should be giving truth.
That's great. So great commentary all the way around on that. And that's a perfect place to sort of segue into the second story. And I'm going to read this headline. This is from Nature. How ChatGPT and other AI tools could disrupt scientific publishing. Subhead says a world of AI-assisted writing and reviewing might transform the nature of the scientific paper. So this very much dovetails with the previous discussion. It's an interesting piece, and it's a fairly long piece. It covers a lot of ground. But George, I'm going to start with you, and then go to John, and then go to Craig. What, you know, we just got done talking about information, misinformation, and sort of where that sits within a popular culture framework. This is more obviously education and academic oriented, but I'm curious just to hear your thoughts on the piece, because it covered a lot of ground. You know, what stood out to you?
I think the thing that stood out to me most was it just seemed odd to me that when there's a tool, whether you're using spell check in Word or Grammarly or any of these other tools, I don't see a problem with that. Some of the stuff that stood out to me in there was the fact that non-English speakers can write, clearer papers and get their ideas across better. I think that that's great. The other thing that really struck me when I was reading it was just the ability to, like if you took something like material science, if you had an AI that has read absolutely every paper ever written on material science in every language around the globe, and you could ask it questions while you were doing your own research, to me, that's the most powerful tool you could ever imagine to have, because there's no one person that can read through millions and millions and millions of documents to pull out nuggets of knowledge. And I think it's sort of silly for them to take a tool that, when used properly, is providing a greater good and efficiency and speeding up and making things clear and everything else. It would be silly to sideline that, right? And it's like any new technology, people get scared of it, but when you use it properly, it's not going to hurt anything. And quite frankly, if you're going through the scientific method and there's peer review on this stuff, I'm sure people are going to hopefully catch any errors, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The timing of AI's arrival into the mainstream consciousness that ChatGPT has sort of ushered along, and Alexa before it, is in this world of scientific and academic publishing. It's like the collision of it's a collision of two forces, because you've got all of this information that wants to come out, but the underlying economics of that industry are, in my opinion, quite broken, where you've got large organizations that sort of just domineer the flow of information, and to which these universities have to pay so much money to, which then distorts and warps the underlying economics of the universities, and the whole thing's just kind of messed up. But no, your points are very well taken, and I agree with your sentiment. John, I'm coming to you. Same question for you. Interesting piece from Nature. What stood out?
Two things stood out. One is just kind of a personal, anecdotal story. I have a close friend him and his wife are both pursuing advanced degrees at prestigious universities, and they do a lot of writing, dissertations. And I try to persuade them to use ChatGPT, and they won't do it because they're terrified. They're just like, no. Like, I don't even want to use it in any way, like research or anything, because there's like strict policies against it. And I've heard of students getting fired for writing papers with this thing. And they're missing the point. I rely on ChatGPT heavily in my writing, and it's good for what Brian Garner, who's a big guy when it comes to how persuasive legal writing. There's the mad scientist stage of the writing. It's like a 4-step process where you have to get all of your thoughts on paper, which you then go back and refine and rework, and you add things to. It's excellent for that. My writing process is simply, you just have a conversation with this machine about what you want to write about. You start with a conversation, and then you propose an outline, and then you ask it questions about the outline. Then you ask it to write a draft based on that outline. And the draft is not reliable. It's a horrible draft, but at least it gives somewhat of an argument about what the flow of the conversation would look like. And you're saying, okay, no, actually, I need to add some additional points here and additional points here and here. And then it just shapes the overall thing. Then after all of that is done, then I go through and write it, and nothing except maybe like a paragraph or two, which is then edited, is copied and pasted. So it's this very minimal copy and pasting. Everyone's mind goes to, hey, just use this machine just to, hey, write me a paper about the use of this drug on this population, and it's going to go out there and just write it. That's just not, that's science fiction. And so it's a tremendous drafting tool, initial drafting tool, and it's a tremendous research aid. You know, it's like at one point I was writing like a theological topic just for like personal edification. And I said, you know, what is the, like, here's this is what Christendom thinks about this topic. What do all of the other world religions think about this topic? And it just was remarkable, like citing the Quran and all these different religious texts to edify in seconds. It would have taken me hours to conduct that research. So that's a very interesting aspect. Something else that stood out to me that I think is very relevant to the customer support world is something that George hit on about. There's someone who's quoted in the article who's a native Japanese speaker who has English as a second or third language, and has noted how this tool has helped him tremendously in being able to put out high quality papers. And what we see in the customer support world is that AI is helping agents who are lowest performing, and that could be due to a variety of factors. It could be due to cultural differences. It could be due to accents. It could be due to socioeconomic disadvantages, lack of education, whatever it may be. The lowest performers are the ones who are getting the greatest lift from this technology. And so it's very cool to see how this has the opportunity to help raise the bar. And at the same time, there's another quote in the article about how this technology is allowing scientists to do what they actually signed up to do, which is to do science rather than write papers. And it's similar in customer support. Customer support agents, they get the job because they're good on the phone. They don't necessarily enjoy doing all the after call work and entering data into CRMs. And so this is a very great tool, I think, for both science and customer support.
Well, you can never underestimate how much academics like to complain about technology. There's a long history of that. And sometimes they've been right, sometimes they've been wrong. But it's interesting just to hear you sort of ruminate on that. And yeah, you would think that this sort of thing would be exciting to anybody who has to write. But you know, sometimes the politics of the day win over the practicality of the tool. And I think some of that is what we see, at least here in the United States, by my eyes, in some of our universities and higher ed. Craig, I'm coming to you with the same question. You've heard two really nuanced takes on this article. I want to get yours as well. What stood out to you? And you know, hit me with whatever you thought about the two previous comments.
Well, I agree with John and George. I think what this does is it levels the playing field. Where you're seeing the complaints come from are these institutions that control all the research. But when AI can make all of this research available to everyone quickly and easily, that's where the playing field gets leveled. And where an academic institution that might not be as advanced in research, not because they don't have as smart people within the institution, but because access to the historical information isn't available, that's where you're going to see this improve. And I don't only think that it's going to help level the playing field, but I think it's going to help advance science much faster. We're going to see rapid advancements in science because the time and effort that it's taken in a variety of places, like creating new proteins to be able to fight diseases. You know, the idea about protein shapes and shapes will enable the advancement of science, picking those right shapes and having AI to be able to generate new shapes of proteins and to be able to do these types of iterative tests rapidly, thousands, hundreds of thousands of tests very quickly. Will be able to speed research, advance science, and level the playing field on a global scale that we've never seen before.
Yeah, Brad, can I just jump in? I mean, I think for me, when I read it, I was like, well, if you think about I don't know, a PhD candidate or somebody applying for a grant or something like that, and they're setting up their experiment. Well, quite frankly, not everything's new and novel. Maybe somebody's already done that experiment in Russia or Germany or France or Australia or somewhere, and it's sitting in a doctoral dissertation on a shelf somewhere. If you can get that into the LLM, and you can ask the AI, hey, here's the experiment I'm setting up. Is it worth doing? Or has somebody done this before? Is there something I should know about? To me, that's immensely powerful because you're not always going to find it. If you go through the abstracts and the journals and everything else, it may not have been published in your language. It may not have been published in your country. And, you know, it's ethnocentric to think that, you know, the United States or North America's got a handle on absolutely everything scientific. So I just see that there's a ton of benefit in not only using the tool to help you write, but also using the tool to help you do research.
No, I think that's, yeah, go ahead, John.
I have a question for Craig on the topic of data source attribution. You mentioned that this is a passion of yours or a topic of interest. Where do you see the laws heading on that? And we just use these journal articles as an example. If a machine is to take this data from these peer-reviewed journals and to use it to answer questions, do you see it shaping up in the manner where data source attribution is required? It's kind of within the current confines of copyright law. And so if there's fair use, then there's no need to provide any type of attribution. Or will it become more nuanced over time?
I think that payment and ownership will be based on copyright law. But I think if we want to look at a model, would be privacy law, where the idea around transparency is ultimate. Be able to know where the sources came from, be able to get, in some instances, permissions to be able to use that. But that idea around transparency that we have around privacy, privacy laws are, I need to be able to tell you as a user what information I gathered from you, how I'm storing it, and how I'm using it. In the same fashion, AI is going to need to be required in order to be able to be cited and used to advance sciences. Where'd you get that information from? What was the background? Do you have permission to use it? And then payments will probably have to be made back to those people who helped develop that research. So if a patent is based on some research that George had done, I'm going to owe George some fee, maybe micro payment maybe, but some type of fee. And so I think that that's how it's going to happen, and quickly advance science, because you're going to want to contribute it, because now the patent won't just be in my name, but you may have a piece of that patent and you will get paid for it. So it's going to help the whole contribution to the greater society, because now that little paper in Russia that George talked about, people are going to want to contribute it to the collective because they'll get paid for it and credit.
Yeah, no, all of that's really good. I want to interject one thing here before we go on to the next story. It's a good opportunity to mention a company I've mentioned on this show a bunch of times in the past over different seasons, and that's Sanas, SANAS. If you're unfamiliar with that, it's worth learning what this company does. I'll tell you what they do. They de-accent customer service calls. So when this company came out with their technology, it's a venture-backed startup, they got a lot of media attention, but it wasn't good. It was, why is this company, and I'm paraphrasing here obviously, but not too far off from being verbatim, why is this company being so racist in de-accenting customer calls? So I will speak from experience. I've said this on the show before. I have a very good friend of mine who's Indian, and I understand every word out of his mouth. His parents, one of them in particular, I cannot understand a thing that she says. And I've seen situations like this before where people don't understand what I say. There's different, our ears are different. And I bring this up because this is just an example. This whole commentary that we've gone through really over the last two articles, it's we have all the opportunity in the world to tear down some of this technology or find reasons to hold it back or to eliminate it altogether, when it could be, it is very helpful for some amount of people. So the struggle, the conflict in our discourse, and we see it in these two articles very clearly, is the struggle between our practicality, the practicality of those in the workforce who need to, or in other situations that need it, versus just our politics. And I think that struggle is going to continue. So all great thoughts from you all. Appreciate the commentary. I want to make sure we leave enough time for this third article, so I'm going to go on to this one at this point. This is from Business Insider. Only 2 in 5 teens are using ChatGPT, survey finds. So, John, I'm going to start with you, and then go to Craig and then George. Does this matter? Like, does this matter at all? Like, first of all, do you believe the headline? Second of all, does this matter? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I'm just interested to hear your thoughts as you took a look at the piece.
Yeah, it's interesting. The article is written in a way that implies that this is a low adoption rate. But when you compare it to adoption among adults, it's a high adoption rate. So the article shows that it's a fall 2023 report. They surveyed 9,193 American teenagers with an average of 15.7 years of age, and 40% of them had used ChatGPT in the last 6 months. Then there's still a little Googling on my own and found a Pew Research article from this August that shows similar research conducted among adults. And it says among adults, among those that have heard of ChatGPT, which is kind of crazy. And in our circles, we're always talking about it. It's all over LinkedIn. I meet people quite often who have never heard of ChatGPT before. Even some people my age, certainly adults, like, older people. I'm 35, so an adult, it's like older than 35 that I talk with. And in this Pew research, they said among those that have heard about ChatGPT, only 18% of adults had ever used it. And so the actual number of adults who have used it is probably significantly less than 18%. So a 40% usage rate within the past 6 months with a technology that's been out almost a year now. I think that's a pretty decent adoption rate in comparison to the overall society.
No, I agree with you. And Craig, I'm going to ask you the same question as John was saying. This article does try to paint this with a little bit of a negative brush. Do you buy into that? Is this positive? Is this negative? Read the tea leaves for us.
Well, I agree with John that it's a high adoption rate when you boil it down to the way that how John framed it. But I think that I'm all about advancing and using this technology in order to better society. And I think that in order to do that, we have to train our kids on the ways to use the technology, not to block them from using it. It's about those schools establishing the rules of the road in order for them to use it. I mean, the other alternative is, do we go back and having them to use card catalogs and encyclopedias? I mean, so how are we able to stand on the shoulders of this new technology to be able to allow our kids to be able to advance the betterment of our society? If they don't learn how to use it now and learn it use it in a responsible manner, who's going to teach them in the future when they're out and outside of my house? So that's my thoughts.
That's a great point. And by the way, find a kid who knows what a card catalog is, and I'll give you a certificate for that. No, I agree. There's a bit of responsibility to all of this, and that's a great point. George, I'm coming to you for the last word. Interesting piece. Obviously, you've heard what the two previous comments. Bit of a Rorschach test kind of article. Your thoughts?
I thought it was nonsense. To think that teenage use of generative AI is some sort of litmus test on the popularity or the uptake doesn't make any sense. And plus, it was only limited to ChatGPT. So, did that include, a kid doing a search on Bing because they're using ChatGPT there as well? And quite frankly, like, I got kids, they've got their own laptops. I'm not paying $20 a month for them to have ChatGPT. There's no use for them, right? ChatGPT doesn't do a viral dance. It doesn't do anything that kids would be interested in. I think it's when you get into the more cerebral activities where you do have to write a paper, where you do have to make a convincing argument, or you do have to do some research. That's when it becomes invaluable. And who knows? I mean, you catch these kids in the summer, they're not doing any schoolwork. So I don't know. It just seemed, again, there's a lot of sensationalist stuff that's coming out. And, my wife's an English teacher. She thinks ChatGPT is the devil. But I'm like, look, it's just a tool. And ultimately, as we go down this road, maybe 50 years from now, kids won't write essays. They won't need to. They'll be doing something else, more value added. And they'll be able to consume a lot more data than they can today. So I don't know. To me, it's, everybody thought the telegraph was going to destroy things, and the telephone was going to destroy things, and the internet was going to destroy things, and rock and roll is going to destroy things. Everything's going to destroy things. I see it as a net good. I don't think teens using it is like I said, the litmus test on this thing.
I gave a few opening remarks at a conference this morning that was put on by George Washington University, and they have a publishing program, and it was all about ethics in publishing. And of course, the entire thing, like every conference these days, is about AI. And if you had said those comments in that room, I think that someone would have had a stroke over not writing essays 50 years from now. But your point is well taken. I think who's to say? And it really goes back to the first piece, right? There's things that are truth in our world, but also it doesn't hurt to be a little less prideful, a little less sure of ourselves about how the future is going to go and what humans will and will not be doing. Because we got plenty of history to show us that, hey, we've been wrong about that a lot of times, numerous times. So history probably will repeat itself again, and we'll be wrong about it again. All of y'all, I appreciate it. John, George, Craig, thank you for being part of the show, sharing your expertise with not just me, but the audience as well. It's greatly appreciated.
Yep, thank you.
We're
Thank you,
season 9, episode 6 of This Week in Voice. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for listening. If you're listening on your podcast provider of choice, until next time.